Welcome to this online lecture for the history of modern Asia. Today we are going to talk about the Great Cultural Revolution, one of the most significant events in the history of China over the last 60 to 70 years. So, anyway, let's get to it. Let's actually begin where we left off, with the Great Leap Forward. The disastrous Great Leap Forward, which attempted to collectivize agriculture and industry, led to the deaths of at least 30 million people from starvation. It also led to a split in the communist leadership. Mao continued to urge rapid collectivization despite its obvious failure. Another leading party official, a man named Deng Xiaoping, on the contrary, urged an end to the Great Leap Forward. Instead, he argued in favor of a slow transition to communism. Ultimately, this split became an open one in the CCP. Deng and his allies used the failure of the Great Leap Forward to declare an end to the plan for rapid collectivization. They urged a slow transition to communism and began pushing Mao to the margins of the government. Mao, meanwhile, railed against what he saw as revisionism. Ultimately, Mao's side became known as the leftist or radical side. Deng's position was the rightist or conservative side. To promote Mao's ideology, one of his allies published quotations from Chairman Mao Zedong. This became known really as the Little Red Book, and it became like the Bible for many young communists in China. Young people memorized its words and its wisdom. It also increased Mao's popularity among the masses. Here is one quote from the book. See if you can't tell what Mao is really saying here. Learn to play the piano. In playing the piano, all 10 fingers are in motion. It will not do to move some fingers only, and not others. However, if all 10 fingers press down at once, there is no melody. To produce good music, the 10 fingers should move rhythmically and in coordination. A party committee should keep a firm grasp on its central task, and at the same time, around the central task, it should unfold the work in other fields. Some play the piano well, and some badly, and there is a great difference in the melodies they produce. Members of the party committees must learn to play the piano well. Mao's power continued to be in decline until May of 1966, when a professor at Beida University in Beijing pasted a poster on the walls outside the university. The poster, which became known as a big character poster due to the large letters, criticized the university administration as anti-party and anti-socialist. Mao had the poster reproduced and published nationwide. Soon it was all over China. Within weeks, groups of high school and college students across the country began to form themselves into groups known as Red Guards. The message of the Red Guard was to praise Mao and his socialist purity while condemning his opponents. Their targets included any person in authority. That included school administration, local government, national government, even Communist Party leadership. Typically, they would begin by calling these individuals names. They accused them of not being true to communism or to Mao. Some were accused of sexual immorality, or of some other offensive behavior. Red Guards also looked to root out and destroy what were identified as the Four Olds. These were things that were seen as holdovers from the emperor's time. They included old customs, old culture, old habits, and old ideas. As I said, these were all things that were connected to China before the communists came to power. In most cases, those suspected of not being true to Mao were simply humiliated. Teachers or administrators might be forced to walk through the streets wearing a dunce cap, for example. In other extreme cases, however, violence broke out. No one knows exactly, but it is suspected that up to 1 million people may have died in the Great Cultural Revolution. That included Mao's enemies within the party. Several were jailed. Others simply disappeared. Deng Xiaoping was reassigned to a rural tractor factory for quote-unquote re-education. The violence and disorder became so great that China became nearly impossible to govern. Thus, in 1969 to 1970, Mao restored order by sending in the army to regain control of the Red Guard. The solution was to send the youth to the countryside to learn about labor from the peasants. Some 15 million young people were ultimately sent to the collective farms. Many of them had to stay there for decades. Excuse me. The Cultural Revolution will ultimately come to an end when, on September 6, 1976, Mao Zedong will die. He leaves behind a country and a communist party in turmoil. This was largely due to the problems of the Great Cultural Revolution and the split within the leadership. The chaos will continue for the next 2 years, especially after Deng Xiaoping will return from exile. He forced Mao's appointed successor from power and assumed leadership himself. With that, China would begin to follow a more moderate path. That path of moderation would completely transform China. But that is a subject for another lecture.